In the last unit, we began to examine the chemical nature of things. In this lesson, we will review the discovery of cells. Surprisingly, the first person to actually see living microbes was not even a scientist, but rather a fabric merchant in Holland. It then took over 150 years to realize that cells are the units of life. In 1669, the amazing artist Johannes Vermeer painted portrayals of the astronomer and the geographer. The details, the delicate lighting are all captivating, the colors so vibrant. The model who posed for these paintings, Antony van Leeuwenhoek, was neither astronomer nor geographer, and in fact, he was far from a scientist at all. Leeuwenhoek was a local linen draper, a fabric merchant in Delft, Holland, and, as was customary, he would examine the stitching and quality of his merchandise with a magnifier, a glass sphere, much like the one I'm holding here. Playing around trying to make better magnifying spheres, he realized that as he shortened the radius of the sphere, he increased its magnifying power. Leeuwenhoek ultimately crafted remarkably tiny spheres that he mounted to produce a sort of single lens microscope. Although simple in its construction, his microscope surpassed anything at the time, as it allowed him to examine the microscopic world at 250 times magnifications. Leeuwenhoek became the first person in the world to explore the world of microbes. He saw for the first time bacteria and even small single-cell creatures in the drops of water taken from the pond surrounding Delft. One evening, when Leeuwenhoek and his missus were enjoying the bliss of endearment while under the blankets of their bed, Leeuwenhoek began to wonder, I wonder what exactly I just left inside of Mrs. Leeuwenhoek. And so, he took a drop and examined it too under his microscope. Watching his sperm swim about, he named these creatures animalcules, that is to say, tiny animals, animalculum in Latin. Here, look for yourselves. Here are the original drawings Leeuwenhoek subsequently made of rabbit and dog sperm. Now, Leeuwenhoek was most definitely not the first to use microscopes in his time. He was, however, simply the best, due to the fact that his microscope surpassed in power even the most sophisticated compound microscopes that had multiple lenses and were easier to use. These complex microscopes, however, were basically complex magnifying glasses with limited magnification that really never went much beyond times 50. It was with such magnifying glasses that in 1665, Robert Hooke, a leading British scientist, published his descriptions of minute bodies in his famous treatise, Micrographia. There, in his observation 18, the texture of cork, he described shaving a very thin slice of cork with a razor and then examining it under his microscope. He wrote, I could exceeding plainly perceive it to be all perforated and porous, much like a honeycomb, but these pores, or cells, were not very deep. Robert Hooke was the first to notice that cork was made of pores, and he called them cells. But wait, did he realize the universality of cells? Did he understand that cells are alive? Most definitely not. This would take over 150 years to discover. It was 1838, and in a pub in Berlin, two scientists attending a scientific symposium met by chance. Matthias Schleiden was a botanist. He had been studying the microscopic structure of plant tissues, leaves, stems, and roots. Fortuitously, Theodor Schwann, a zoologist, sat next to him. Not surprisingly, after a beer or so, the two men began chatting. Schleiden shared with Schwann that it seemed that plants were always made of cells, no matter what type of plant tissue he examined. The bottom line was that they were all made of cells, each with its own nucleus. Schwann was blown away. Not that he didn't believe Schleiden, quite the contrary. he realized that animals were made of cells as well. Under the microscope, Schwann studied livers, brains, and muscles, and all were made of nucleated cells. Schleiden and Schwann suddenly understood that all living things were made of cells. Together, they proposed the cell doctrine, stating that 1. All living organisms were made of cells, and 2. Cells were themselves alive. Now, to be honest, they got a bit carried away with their second conclusion. They really hadn't proved that cells were alive. However, as it turns out, this is true. Indeed, cells are the basic unit of life.